So, Matt Wilson from WT Capital, you help people buy investment properties, but you've been on a bit of journey yourself as an investor. So can you remember the very first one? And
I can.
where you bought it, what it cost, and do you still have it?
Yeah, I can. I also remember reading the Hotspotting report before I purchased it. That was I was in Gilliston Heights. I was in the Hunter region. I purchased that for $490. I don't have it anymore. I sold it. I made a couple $100,000 on that one, and that was, I suppose, really that really helped me get started. I think it was fortuitous timing, mostly luck. I think there was tremendous growth in the Hunter region at that time, and I think the stars just aligned and really helped me get started. And that one, it was a good one to start. It had good cash flow, and there was tremendous amount of growth in a short period of time as well.
I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone in this podcast who actually still owns their first property, and it's an interesting point because there's two basic philosophies you can apply. I think you can buy and sell, trade your way to a success, or you can buy good assets, keep them, accumulate. Which of those do you think it makes the most sense for property investors?
I think both work. In summary, I think with our clients, I think we start with, before we talk about the strategy, we start with a goal. And I think if they're a client that work with us, if it's someone else who's starting off investing, if they can really articulate what the goal is. I mean, people buy property not because, generally speaking, not because they're particularly interested in property, because they want the financial benefit that's associated with owning the asset. So I think if they start with a goal and they say, hey, we need to be at this amount, or we need X amount of passive income when we retire, I think then you can reverse engineer that and work backwards and figure out, what type of strategy might be appropriate, what the starting point is. I think, there are tenets with property investment that are universal, irrespective of the strategy you adopt, whether it's, to buy quality assets and hold them over a period of time, or whether it's, to buy, undervalued properties and then hold them for a shorter period and then flip them and then sort of leapfrog into other opportunities. So I think, there's value in both strategies, definitely.
So there's no one size fits all?
I don't think so.
The right strategy depends on the individual, their circumstances, their income, their age, their family circumstances, all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, I think, there's no two clients that are ever the same, no two people that are ever the same. Everyone has, a different starting point and ultimately different end point. So I think, you've got to be fluid when you look at that, and when you sort of, when you look at different strategies to adopt in the investment journey. I think you need to be prepared to change that as well. If the market changes, there are all these variables we can't control. So, if something changes, in 12 months, 18 months, 24 months time, we need to refine the strategy as well. Yeah,
that's right. Well, what we find, and what I've found as long as I've been involved with real estate, is that markets are changing, new paradigms coming all the time, and it's not static. And quite often people are out there stuck with fixed ideas about what works, but maybe that worked 10 years ago, not necessarily true today.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think we see that frequently. Commonly, if people have an owner-occupied property that held for some period of time, and market conditions, that was 10, 15, sometimes 20 years ago, market conditions and borrowing conditions for that rate as well, were vastly different back then. So what worked successfully back then might not be the right approach for now. So I think, people need to understand that, markets are cyclical and they repeat. So I think if you can identify maybe what worked back then, if the conditions aren't the same now, then it potentially is time to adopt a different strategy.
Yeah. So for your personal investing, do you have an underlying philosophy that applies to what you do?
I think it's a fairly basic one, and it's three main tenets. I think the chief one is fairly simple. It's just identify deep intrinsic value in the asset. I think for any leveraged purchase, support that with above average cash flow, and I think that the third one really is actually have a goal. Where are we? Orient yourself properly. Where are you heading? What do we need to do to get there? And then measure success in regular intervals. Every quarter, and do that consistently. And don't just take the first step and hope. Have a goal you're aiming for, and understand that the market's always going to change. No one has a crystal ball. But I think if you're checking in regularly and understand where you're heading, you'll understand what you need to do to change and how to get there faster.
Okay, so you've just articulated a process that can work for yourself and for others, but the stats show that very few people actually get a high level of success. You know, most people own 1 or 2 properties maybe, and we're talking today about the 1%, the 1% of those who own investment properties who have 5 or more. Why do you think it is that so few people get beyond 1 or 2?
I think there's probably some degree of self-limitation as well, but I think, people need to need to really set a goal, and whether it's a number of properties or whether it's equity generated or free cash flow generated in a portfolio, I think they need to really set the goal first, and have the right network around them. You know, they need to be asking questions to people who have developed big portfolios and achieve this. And I mean, you just said it, the stats are there. There's only a select, it's under a 1% that have 5 or more properties in Australia. So I think, people need to be speaking to the 1%, and invariably anyone who purchases property always encounters some area of difficulty. So you need to have the right people around you to ask them, well, how did you navigate this scenario, situation to get from property 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 plus. So I think it's, it's asking the right questions to the right people who've already encountered that problem, because everyone who's got lots of properties has always encountered problems.
Yeah, there's nobody who's got there who hasn't made mistakes.
Exactly, yeah,
including
exactly.
you and me, probably.
Yeah, totally.
But you did mention a very important point. That's about having an objective. I'm amazed how many people I speak to who just have this vague idea that they want to get into property investing, but they don't really have an end game. They haven't got a vision of where they want to get to with it. And that's part of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I think, how can you possibly ever achieve something you haven't defined? So I think, whether it's property, whether it's 5 properties, whether it's 2, 3, 5, $10 million portfolio, I think you need to first define it and then understand what steps are required to get there, and how do we determine success, and then how do we measure success, at regular intervals to see whether we're on track or whether we need to change or augment something.
A big part of the problem, as I see it, is a reluctance by people to spend money on information and advice. They will get a loan and buy a $500,000 property, but they won't spend relatively small sums on advice from an accountant, a lawyer, an investor or advisor like yourself, a buyer's agent. I think that's one of the reasons why so few people get to where they really want to get to with property investment.
Totally, yeah. Look, I totally agree. I think I look at to be honest, most of the successes I've had in property, I've had to ask someone else how to get there, or how to navigate something, or what entity to buy it in, or how to structure the financing. And these are all questions I didn't have the answers to. So you need to have people who've already done that. They've already got to where you want to be, or where you hope to be. You need to ask them. You need professionals who've done it before, or you need people who've got a network of professionals around them that you can leverage. So I think the advice component is critical, because no one is born knowing exactly how to put together and compose a perfect property portfolio from day one. So I think you need to leverage other people's expertise and other people's experience. So
we say to people, build your team first, then build your portfolio. That you would agree that's a philosophy for people to follow.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I think if you've got a team, even if it's just an advisor or a friend or someone who's already done that, they've already got an established portfolio, I'm sure they will have encountered many different problems, be that tenants or rates going up or unforeseen repairs to the property. I think if someone can support you, provide some sage advice in ultimately a scenario, a situation that you haven't experienced before, I think that's probably going to give people the motivation, the courage to push on and keep building the portfolio, because if you hold property, there's always going to be something that's unforeseen that pops up. So to a certain degree, I think it's the difference between regarding investing as a business or seeing it as a hobby. And I think most Australians, it's a bit of a hobby, it's a spare time thing, whereas those who succeed have a business approach to it. And part of that is you've got to spend money to make money. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's any portfolio, even if it's just one property, I think, if you really want it to run efficiently and effectively, you should be looking, even if it's just an investor with one relatively cheap or affordable investment property, you want to try and refine it and improve the portfolio, even if it's just 1% at a time. You want to be consistently doing that and tinkering with it and really optimizing it to get the most out of it. And I think, when you do that and I think a lot of the times, the big successes come from just managing, controlling all the small inputs. And if you do that very consistently over years and years and years, you'll generate a pretty substantial portfolio. And obviously, when there's equity within that portfolio, you can leverage that and continue to develop and grow.
Yeah. So in terms of developing that portfolio, how important is it to get that first one right?
I think it's not as important as having the right team, because if you get the first one wrong and if you've got the right team around you, they'll know exactly how to get you out of that one or how to fix that one and get you into 2, 3, 4 and 5. I think people who don't have the right team and they get the first one wrong, I mean, that can often become terminal. So I think if you have the right team, you have the right network around you, no matter what happens, someone, if they've experienced something similar before, they'll know what to do, how to change it. Do we sell it? Do we buy it? What do we do? How do we change the asset? Do we change the structure that it's held in? They'll have an answer to help you get from property number 1 to 2, or liquidate property number 1 and then go into properties 2, 3, 4. So I think, it's not as critical as having the right people around you.
Okay. And this next question, normally when I ask this question, they're a little bit older than you are. The question is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to the 20-year-old or the 25-year-old sort of starting out?
Well, I don't think we've got enough time, Terry, but I think it'd be invest sooner and invest more. Time is always the magic ingredient with every portfolio, irrespective of the asset class.
Yeah. I mean, there's no, it's never too late to start, but if you start young, your chances of achievement is so much better.
Totally. I think, the earlier you start, the less pressure there is for the investment to perform at an above average level. The market will naturally do the heavy lifting for you. Yeah. So I think if you can just get in, make some sensible decisions, then you've already got a very strong base to, even if you forget about it for 5-10 years, you've got a good base to work from. If you can, buy a property that's half reasonable, support that with, good cash flow, then, I mean, half the job's really done.
I suppose if you're young, single, starting out, it's easier to recover from mistakes you might make than if you're perhaps 40-ish with family.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think with time, I think you can afford to risk, potentially not the right word, but you can be a little bit more courageous. I think, when you've got time on your side. So, if you can set up a portfolio and probably not have to pay the same amount of attention to it that you would, maybe if you're only in the workforce for another, 5-10 years.
Okay, speaking of mistakes, what mistakes have you made in the past that you would like people to be aware of and not repeat as they are early in their investment journey? There's been countless mistakes, but I think probably one of them that's really sat with me for a while, I think, is not actually having the right research process. So, when you identify a property in a suburb, in a council, in a city, in a state, really understanding on a very granular level, what is it that's going to influence price growth in a positive manner, and really be able to articulate that to give yourself confidence to take action when that's required. And I remember, very clearly looking at a deal that I thought it'd be good, but I wasn't 100% certain, and I was reluctant and didn't take action. And if I had, I would have made a lot more money. So I think it's having the right investment process and understanding what research and what data you're looking at and why that's going to influence price growth. I think that's critical. So real estate abounds with myths and misconceptions, a lot of them thanks to media, perhaps.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest ones you think people need to be aware of and not be misled by?
I think probably for me, I mean, location sounds a bit cliche. I think location, a lot of people, and perhaps it's the great Aussie dream where people think that the first property they buy needs to be their forever home and they retire there. But I think it's probably location, but we have, for such an enormous country, we have a fairly narrow field of vision. People are commonly just looking at opportunities in their backyard or in their city, and there's thousands of suburbs that, many of which are presenting opportunities, that are, have fantastic returns year on year. So I think, people think that, they just because they can't afford where they live or close to where they live means that, they've got to put off investing. They can't, partake in the property market. Whereas, the reality is, they can buy it in a location that's more affordable, and then all of a sudden, once they've got their foot in the market, you've got an asset that's working for you. And I think, property is always going to appreciate at a faster rate you can ever save. So I think sometimes it's about, setting yourself up to get into the market rather than just looking in your immediate vicinity and saying, it's too hard, or I can't afford it, or I can't buy my dream home at 25, and just giving up. So.
Yeah. So regard the whole of Australia as your potential market, not just your backyard.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I think, we look at a variety of locations, literally Australia-wide, every week, and there's opportunities in each of those locations. So I think, people don't have to be limited. Just because one location's not right at this point in time doesn't mean in 12 months it's not going to be right then. So I think, people need to be a bit more flexible, and again, just going back to my last point, understanding, why they're looking in a certain area, what are the key drivers of growth within that area.
Do you think people are limited by the belief that if they can't go and personally inspect something, they can't buy it? Is it?
I think so. I think technology is helping people cross that mental bridge and shift that paradigm. I think, with the Matterport cameras they use in real estate now, and the virtual inspections, I think that's really helping. Google Maps, things like this, I think is really helping. But effectively, a property is really just like a business. If you're going to buy stock in a ASX listed company, and you're reading annual reports, it's looking at spreadsheets. Property should be no different. There should be no emotional attachment to it. Really just looking at, what can I buy this asset for? What's it worth? What's it producing? And what do we hypothesize growth is going to be in the next 12, 24, 36 months?
Okay. Matt Wilson, thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks for having me.